Sorry for the interruption. We're okay now. So, Toplazin, he goes to the Mayan Empire, and that is where he begins to spread the idea of Quetzalcoatl. Now, Quetzalcoatl, and what does he represent, changes over the years. So it's quite difficult to narrow down what exactly he is the god of. Depending on who you ask or what you read, he could be the god of several different things. He can be the god of wind and knowledge and writing and many other different things. Regardless, Quetzalcoatl is just a very powerful god in accordance to the Toltec, Aztecs, and the Maya. And so during the 1100s, the Toltec would fall to conquest basically by a coalition of other tribes in Mexico that they all band together and fight against the Toltec. And the Aztecs rise up as being the most powerful out of that group, and as a result, one of the most powerful empires in Meso American history. Now, even their foundation is surrounded around religion. That they were trying to figure out where exactly they would create their capital city. Like, where should they have their capital city? And it was right around 1325 AD where they get commanded by their god, which this is another god's name I can't pronounce correctly, so I'm not going to try. Sorry. I usually try to figure that out, but this one I don't remember. Sorry. And the sign that they believed that they received was that there was an eagle perched on a cactus consuming a serpent. Now, this should sound very familiar for some of y'all because there is a flag, a very famous flag, that reflects this vision. And by now, hopefully, you should have guessed it's the Mexican flag. The Mexican flag on its center depicts this sign from the gods that the Aztecs should settle their land on this lake. And so the Aztecs would create a centralizing power in the Valley of Mexico, and they were conquerors through and through, vicious, violent conquerors that they would cover 80,000 square miles. And under their control alone, we estimate that excuse me, they would rule over 5 to 15 million people. And that is a huge amount of people they have to feed. If y'all recall, over in Europe, we were talking about that Paris having 80,000 people, or Constantinople having 400,000 people was a large amount for that time. We're talking about the millions over here, so that should already give you an idea of how advanced the Aztecs were in comparison to their European counterparts. I mean, the only one who probably outpaces them with this is China. That we know that China, under the Song Dynasty, had right around, if I remember correctly, 33 million people. And so this is a huge feat. So how exactly did they achieve this? And so they would have these floating gardens all throughout the empire, and it would be an agriculturally based society. It also helped for them, at least, that they would rule expecting tribute from surrounding tribes. That they would go to other tribes and basically to make sure you stay on their good side, you either had to give them gold, maize, excuse me, cocoa beans, cotton, jade, anything that they asked for in order to stay on the Aztecs' good side. And if you didn't, well, you were up next for sacrifice. And sometimes they would go around demanding people to be sacrificed to the gods. And you wanted to stay on the good side of the Aztecs. And they would use some very fierce warriors, and these would be the Jaguar warriors. These guys were awesome. That they were fearsome, brutal warriors on the battlefield, and they would carry these clubs, these amazing weapons. That not only was it a smashing weapon, it was also a slicing weapon. That on the edges, if you see those notches on the side of this club, that is obsidian glass that they would put on the side of that. So it would cut through their victim as it was smashing through them. And so I found this pretty sweet picture where this dude's chopping this dude's face in half. Pretty amazing. And so we've seen this social structure many, many times at this point. You guys should be familiar with this. So why do we have to keep talking about it? We really need to drive the point across that human beings across the globe have very similar behaviors, even though they have not talked to each other. And so we need to realize that this is a human behavior everywhere. And so it very much mirrored the same thing as the Maya, that the king was the head of the civilization. The power of the king was absolute. He would literally rule on top of the temple, figuratively and literally. And then underneath him was the exact same order: the priesthood, the nobles, merchants, and artisans, and then commoners, the farmers and slaves. And so, uh, now, in order for you to even be able to approach him, you had to have bare feet, and then you had to be face down and like crawl towards him in order to be able to seek audience with him. And it's usually at this time that I would call for a volunteer, and both of us would go face down on the floor doing this, and that's always a lot of fun. But unfortunately, I'm not in the classroom. Sorry, y'all. And so by the 1500s, now remember, that's a pivotal time. You need to remember 1500s. We have Tenochtitlan as the large urban center of trade. This is a map that was actually drawn up um, depicting Tenochtitlan. And when the Spaniards arrived there, they said it was grander than any city in Europe. They even compared it to Rome at one point. And it was larger than any European capital. I mean, the capital alone we estimated had 200,000 to 400,000 people in it, and it was very well engineered. They had excellent urban planners. Like they actually planned ahead as they expanded. Something more than we can say than let's say like Crandall. Not trying to be mean, but we see the issues that Crandall is facing right now with the expanding population. This was something that was forward thinking for the Aztecs, not so much for the city council of Crandall. Sorry, not trying to be mean, but that's what it is. And so the island city would have canals, causeways, and ringed villages that had all connected the city to one another, with a huge market for goods. Sorry, a huge market for goods in the center. And they traded for every kind of good that you can think of that was available at the time. Now, a lot of these foods would be grown on floating gardens that were in the lake, and they were extremely productive to be able to grow food for the huge amount of people that lived in the city. Now, Tenochtitlan would also have hundreds of temples similar to like the Mayans, and other religious structures that they would worship about 1,000 gods or so. They're very polytheistic. And now, if you ask me to name 10 of them, I couldn't do that. But Quetzalcoatl was probably one of the most powerful ones that they adopted. Is that, uh, excuse me. Again, he was seen as a god of different things. So he was the god of learning, wind, death, rebirth. Regardless, considered a very powerful god to the Aztecs. And much like the Mayans, they also believed that they needed to feed the gods, and so they would do this mainly through human sacrifice. And so the Aztecs would also sacrifice people to feed the gods, primarily the god of the sun, to basically help him continue to keep the sun rising each day. That they believed that they were actively helping the gods keep the movement of the universe going. And similar to the Mayans, if I remember correctly, they also believed that the universe had been remade several times in order to be able to keep balance, not only just between good and evil, but just keeping the universe in working order. And so they would brutally rip out hearts of people who were alive. And the Mayans, we said that were probably like hundreds of thousands. We know for sure that the Aztecs did well into the thousands. The Spaniards would say that at one point, one night that they sacrificed between like 20,000 to 30,000 people, something along those lines. And the Aztecs still have a lasting legacy to today. That they influence a lot of Mesoamerican culture, primarily in Mexico, of course. And we live in the great state of Texas, and you guys have seen this too, like the Day of the Dead celebration seen here. This was in downtown Dallas, and if I remember correctly, it was in 2020. My wife and I went to. We try to make it every year. Usually, it's hosted in Oak Cliff, but it was not this time. But here we see the influence that the Aztecs have still up to today with the traditional dress wears, the celebration of dead ancestors. And so here's some dancers for y'all. And one guy kind of just stood out to me. I like this guy's headdress, so I took a picture of him. But this is directly influenced by the Aztecs, that they did have a celebration of the dead. And today we celebrate it as the Day of the Dead, which is technically 2 days in November, where they believe that the plane of the dead and the plane of the living begin to blur, and that you were able to interact with your ancestors and be able to give them offerings. Um, and we also see other influences of Aztec culture, primarily again surrounding around like with the Day of the Dead of like the candy skulls. I have a few of those in my classroom. At this point, I would usually show those to you guys and like the influence that it has on primarily Mexican culture today. But I can't do that, so sorry. And so now we started having some problems in the Aztec Empire. We get Montezuma II, that he's the emperor of the Aztec Empire, and there's a dramatic increase in population, and he, in order to be able to counterbalance this, he increases sacrifices by the thousands. Now the surrounding tribes would get really angry about this because he's not sacrificing his own people, he's sacrificing other tribes. But then something happens that really shuts this down, and that would be the arrival of the Spanish. This would be the arrival of Hernan Cortez. Hernan Cortez would be seen, according to some, as the return of the gods. And so, whoops, okay, I thought I had another slide here. Apparently, I don't. Hernan Cortez comes with the conquistadores, and according to the Aztec legends, that the gods left the kings in charge. This sounds very similar to the Mayans, that the kings were left in charge, but to be ready for when the gods come back. And the way the gods say that they're going to come back was that they were going to come back with shiny skin, holding thunder and lightning in their hands, gray beards, and riding upon great deer. And the Spaniards, and the Spaniards come with shining skin, their armor. They come riding great deer, horses. Remember, horses did not exist in the Americas. They were introduced by the Europeans. And so the Aztecs had never seen a horse before. And then the thunder and lightning in their hands, that was the firearms, that was their guns. And initially Montezuma welcomes them in, but then over time he figures out that, oh man, these guys are just total jerks and they're after gold, because the Spaniards would say that they had a sickness of the heart that only gold could cure. Eventually, over time, Montezuma figures this out and he kicks them out. Now, Cortez begins to conquer the surrounding tribes. He actually forms a coalition as he goes. And the way that he did this was that he conquered a local tribe, and in their own words, he was awarding out girls. And when I talk about girls, I'm talking about 12-year-old to probably about 15 or 16-year-olds old. 15 to 16-year-old. So, and you can imagine what awarding means. just let your imagination fill in the blanks. I don't need to say that. Now, while he was doing this, he was about to award a girl to his cousin, but then they figured out that she was able to speak not just Aztec, but a lot of languages of the surrounding tribes. And so then they started to teach her Spanish, and they eventually get her to be a translator. And she goes around to the other tribes and is used as a translator for Cortez. And Cortez forms a coalition of tribes that were very angry with the Aztecs. Remember, they're angry with the Aztecs for the increase in human sacrifices, being conquered by them for so long, the tributes that they were demanded, etc. Um, and eventually Cortez takes down Tenochtitlan. That he managed to do this with, if I remember correctly, about 600, actually no, it's a little bit more than that, I think about 1,500 Spaniards and a coalition, excuse me, of natives. And the mighty Aztec Empire is brought down in one night, and we call this Noche Triste, that's the sad night. And so uh, we see the end of the Aztecs with Hernan Cortez. And Hernan Cortez, he becomes the standard of what it means to be a Spaniard. He's the first one to conquer in the New World. I know that we talked about the Mayans, and you're probably going, well, what about Alvarado? I was teaching at that point the order of the societies. If we're talking about the order of the conquests here, Cortez is the first conqueror. And Hernan Cortez is seen as a model to Spaniards. He is a hero in Spain. Every man wants to be him, and women want to be with him. And so he comes back with these fantastic stories and riches of the New World. And this is what fuels the conquistadores to pour out of Spain into Central and South America to conquer. And so after Cortez comes Pedro de Alvarado. Here comes Ponce de Leon. Here comes Francisco Pizarro and others. These names of conquerors that we remember today all were modeled after Cortez. Now, just like how I spoke with the Mayans, yes, there was conquering, but the main thing that kills natives is disease. And so the last empire in the last section that we're going to be talking about of Native Americans in the New World is the Inca. Now, the Inca are not in Central America. They are in South America, primarily Peru, where they settle in the Andes. And you probably recognize them from this movie. All right, we're good there. That yes, Emperor's New Groove is based off the Incan civilization, and yes, Cusco was a real place. And the Inca built their civilization in this area here. If you look at the green, it's primarily, excuse me, from Peru all the way down to parts of Chile. Now, this is built very high up into the Andes. We talked about 7,500 feet in Mexico being very tall. The highest point of the Incan Empire is over 22,000 feet, which comes with multiple problems. One of the things that y'all should remember that we talked about a mountainous society is agriculture. Yeah, if y'all remember, we talked about with Japan that the land was very difficult for them to be able to farm. Still is the case today. That the way that the Inca get around this is by building terraces on the side of the mountains. If you actually look at this picture of Machu Picchu, on the bottom right here, you can see some of those terraces. It's taking out sections of the mountain to make what looks like steps. And they use those steps to be able to create farms on the side of the mountain. I'm sorry, I'm starting to struggle here. And much like their Mesoamerican kin, religion plays a major role in the lives of the Inca. We're noticing a common theme here again, that religion is very dominant in everyday life, that they believe that the king was a descendant of the sun god, and not just him, but they create a whole system of society based on who they believe was related to the sun god. That they believe that only about 1 out of 11 men in the Incan civilization was related to the sun god. And they were the only ones who could be part of nobility, and therefore can only be the ones who were chosen to be king. And so they have this line of succession, this lineage built on what they believe is the lineage of the sun god. Now, when we talk about the Andes here, like this is not something you're going to be tested on, but just something to note, that you have to wonder how immensely difficult it was to be able to build this, because as you get higher on the mountains, literally the amount of oxygen that is available for your body is lessened. That, I think, if I remember correctly, there's less than uh, 1/3 of oxygen from where you and I are right now. That if you decided to go visit Peru, you're going to struggle. If you never lived in the mountainous area, I mean, even if you have lived in the mountainous area, but you've lived in, like, let's say Texas for some time, you're not acclimated to that climate. No, not none whatsoever. That if you tried to go to Peru now and just walk around normally, you will get winded very quickly, because it only has 2/3 of the amount of oxygen. If I remember correctly, it's 2/3. 2/3 of the amount of oxygen that you would normally take in. One of the big businesses in Peru is renting out oxygen tanks to foreigners, because foreigners don't prepare themselves for this journey, and so they need the extra oxygen just to be able to walk around. Now imagine that you're trying to hike the mountains. Yeah, right. Good luck with that. And so they build these cities very high up in the mountains, higher than Denver, higher than the Mexico City in Mexico. So when we talk about the capital city, Cusco is almost 35 or 3,500 meters up in the air. It's over 11,000 feet up in the air. And I mean, just mentioning Emperor's New Groove here again, the people at Disney doing their research, the mountaintop Paja's mountain village is based off of Machu Picchu. That you can see that iconic, like, double peaked mountain there. Um, but this is how high up in the mountains that this is, and it's just incredible that human beings were able to build such a vast civilization so high up in the mountains. What a incredible feat to be able to do, and this is the reason why I want to talk about them so much. Is that the book, which I know you all really have access to, but it really glosses over some of the amazing feats that our ancestors over here in the New World have accomplished, because we concentrate so much on Asia and Europe that we tend to forget about the peoples of the New World and the peoples of Africa, of just the great accomplishments that they've done. And we'll get to Africa in a later chapter as well. And so we have this emperor. This emperor is one of the more powerful, sorry, and impactful emperors in Incan history, and that is Pachacute. And he becomes the king after Cusco. Uh, after Cusco is attacked, and his brother would actually run away instead of fighting. And Pacha never expected to be the emperor. By the way, he was actually seen as, like, the weaker of the brothers, if I remember correctly. But he eventually leads a coalition. He leads the military to a great victory, and he successfully defends Cusco, and he exiled his father. There's a lot of family drama here, and I'm sorry, I don't remember everything off the top of my head here. But one of the cool things is that I like what his name means. Your book doesn't say this either. That his name literally translates to Earth Shaker or World Transformer. And you don't earn a name like that unless you actually do something that is amazing. Now, over his 33 years of rule, He conquers all of Peru, places all the tribes under his control, and he makes a very strong centralized government. You can really relate a lot of things that the Incans are about to do to the Chinese dynasty of the Song. You're going to see a lot of similarities here. And so he creates a very strong centralized government through a series of small projects over time. Now, he would die to illness. What illness, I don't know off the top of my head, but he did not have a succession system. So his son eventually takes his place, Tupac Incan Yupanqui. And if you're going like, oh, that sounds familiar, Tupac, yeah, that's where the rapper gets his name from. It's actually an Incan name. And he assumes the throne in 1471, our best guesstimation here. And now they build this grand city, Machu Picchu, here. It's one of the world wonders that we have in human history. And this is the ruins that we have left behind of Machu Picchu. This city was able to support thousands of people in there. And Peru has a beautiful landscape. We have the Rainbow Mountain here. And just to give you an idea of like how big this mountain is, if you look at the bottom center of the picture, that's a crowd of people adoring this mountain. And the thing that's making the colors of this mountain is that the mountains of Peru are extremely mineral rich. This is a combination of different minerals that are being exposed to oxygen. The red is more than likely caused by iron. Now, what's causing the kind of bluish color, I don't know what that one is. That possibly can be copper. That might be copper. And then I think that yellow is sulfur. And so it's all sorts of these mineral-rich deposits in these mountains that causes this coloration because it's oxidization over time, and it's just a really beautiful sight. And now the Incan government grows to be very powerful. Now the emperor realizes that it's extremely hard to govern this entire vast region. And so what he does is that he breaks it up into much more smaller, manageable units, almost like states or provinces throughout the empire, and is controlled by a central bureaucracy. This is where you guys should start thinking about comparing it to China, because they have bureaucracies, they have smaller provinces, they have smaller kingdoms to help be able to run the empire. And in order to unite all people under the Incan government, they make the Incan language the official language of the empire. So you had to learn it. And they established schools all across the empire for people to learn the language. So they were all united under one language. Not just that, compared to other empires, it was extremely easy, again, comparatively, to get from one side of the empire to the other. That they built an extensive road system, much like ancient Rome, that all of these roads would lead to the capital of the empire, and they would lay and connect over 14,000 miles of road. And some of these would be these rope bridges that you see in the bottom right corner here for people to be able to link together. And so this not only linked together the empire for the bureaucracy to be able to operate, but it also linked together for trade and also communication. That we do have evidence that they had a quasi postal system for the government. And so this is very, very similar to the Chinese. The Chinese had a postal system already in place. It is just really amazing that you have these two completely sets of people that through intuition create these efficient government systems. And so the Incan government becomes highly centralized with bureaucracy and road management. A pretty impressive feat for these ancient people. And now the Incan government had direct control over the people. It very much was top down leadership here. That the government would take a community based system approach, that they would award lands to families, and we call this the Ailu, if I remember pronouncing that correctly. It's Ailu. And the Ailu was created because the government realized that The projects were too large for any single member of families or single families to be able to do. And so they broke down projects in the ILU for family units to, excuse me, to complete government projects. And they took it a step further that every citizen was required to enter into the system of labor, and it was a form of slavery. If we want to get into a discussion, and we call this the mitas system. The mitas system required that every citizen labored for a certain number of days, and this was determined by the government. How many days? It really was up to the government. If I remember correctly, I've seen between 40 to 80 days of labor that you owed to the government, and this is how the government was able to make these vast projects work. Now, this wasn't to say that there wasn't resistance, is that families would actually be broken up into units of 10. And if you decided to resist this, that you didn't like that, well, then they would relocate your whole family. They would break up the family and just spread them across the empire. And it's like, how do you like them apples? And like, you didn't want to be together? Well, now you're going to be apart. And so the Inca government was highly centralized, extremely powerful, much like the Chinese government. Now, they did have record keeping. If you remember towards the beginning of the 9 weeks, I mentioned that not all record keeping is writing, and I keep warning students, do not fall for this trap. Do not ever write written records. You write down record keeping. Why? Because the Inca did not have a writing system, but they did have record keeping, and it was these multicolored knot system called quipu. And so these knots actually mean something. The colors all mean something. The placement of the knots, the size of the knots, how that they were written, all communicated uh, what they were covering. It was actually really cool. I have some other pictures here that the length had meaning to it, the knots had meaning to them, the colors all had meanings to them. And if someone was very, very skilled at reading a quipu, they could just look at it and feel with their fingers and just feel how the knot was tied and be able to know exactly what it says. And so we see them in all sorts of different ways. This is one here. And we do know what they mean. The Spaniards, after they conquered the Inca, yeah, what do you know, the Spaniards again, they actually cataloged this system. And so we actually know what all the knots mean now. And so, ironically, thanks to the Spaniards, we understand how this writing system works. And there's actually a book written by the Spanish scholars that they show us what these mean. And they break it down to where you'll be able to learn the whole system. Now, religion was extremely central to the Inca. They were polytheistic, just like the Maya and the Aztecs, but based on what we know about them, they weren't as polytheistic. They didn't have 1,000 gods. How many? I don't remember, sorry. But one thing that we do know is that, well, a couple things we do know is that they worship the celestial bodies. They would worship the moon, the stars, thunder, the sun. It was a lot of nature worship. And again, the king was seen as the son of the sun god. And that when the people would worship the sun god, they were also worshiping the king. Now, women could lead worship services. And this is kind of unique to the Incas, is that women actually did play a pretty central role in their religious ceremony. Now, just like the Maya and just like the Aztecs, human sacrifice would be central to Inca religion. But one major departure from the Mayans and the Aztecs is that they would primarily do child sacrifice. And we have seen evidence from as children as young as like 7 years old, as to as old as 15 or 16. Um, and a lot of them actually came from the upper class, and they would be prepared for sacrifice. They would feed them, fatten them up, and get them ready. And as they would lead them to sacrifice to make sure the children were not afraid or resisted, a lot of the time they would give them drugs or something to be able to alter their mental state to where they didn't resist. And a lot of the time, these children were killed in one of two manners. One was strangulation, where they literally would just choke them to death. And then the other, and you can choose which one is worse, is just cutting their throats. And so we find a lot of these remains, like on the bottom right here, that's a child's skull that's decorated. We find a lot of these remains on top of mountains. And one remains that we find is this girl here. And she is remarkably preserved. That is her skin. That is her hair. Her braids are still intact. She almost looks like she's sleeping. She was so well preserved that, and if I remember correctly, she's over 500 years old. Uh, and the evidence that we have is that she was drugged before she was sacrificed, and she had her throat cut. But that's actually her skin. That is actually her hair. Now, whether that's her clothes or not, I don't know about that. I didn't look all that up. But this is technically a mummy that is found over here in the New World. In one of my other slides for my on-level class, I have a slide that says mummies around the world, and it's to dispel the idea that mummies are all from Egypt, because that's not true. Now, the Inca would build great cities, very large cities, and religion was such a central part of their religion. And because the Inca were very rich in gold, they would cover their temples in a very thin layer of gold, to where the walls were covered in gold, and they would call it the sweat of the sun. And this is more than likely where the Spanish legend of El Dorado comes from, the city of gold in the New World. The conquistadores were very prone to exaggeration to entice people to want to risk the journey to come to the New World. But that's more than likely where that legend comes from. Now, the Inca would fall to, and I thought I had his name on here, but I guess not. They would fall to Francesco. Oh wait, Pizarro. Excuse me. Uh, they would fall to Pizarro. Now, Pizarro actually only shows up with 500 men. Um, but with 500 men, he would take down the Incan civilization. And the way that he did this was that Pizarro, he meets the Incan emperor, and at the time, it's this Incan emperor called Atahualpa. And Atahualpa uh, meets him in Peru. Atahualpa is immediately suspicious of Pizarro. He sees them as a threat. And so he actually meets the 500 Spaniards with 30,000 men, his army. Pizarro knows there's absolutely no way he's going to win this fight. And so he tricks Atahualpa. He says, "We're not invaders. We're here to make diplomatic relations. We want to be allies. And so we want to have a peace meeting. So let's go ahead and sit down and have a meeting with each other and just let's talk about being friends." Now, Atahualpa sees him as a very good, potential, powerful ally. So he accepts. Now, Pizarro realizes that there's no way he's going to get out of this alive. That's his thought. And so he finds a room about the size of the one on the bottom right here. He finds a small room with one entryway in and out. And he has all 500 men in there. Now, no, not all 500. He has a few hundred men in there, so it's very crowded. The rest of the men are waiting outside. They've laid an ambush for Atahualpa. And so Atahualpa shows up with 5,000 unarmed guards. And he comes in, and they start having negotiations. Things are going okay, but then it turns south. when Pizarro's interpreter starts bringing up Catholicism, and it's not making sense to Anahualpa, and the Catholic priest with Pizarro offers Anahualpa this book, and it's basically the book of rituals in Catholicism. So Anahualpa is holding in his hands basically Catholicism. Anahualpa gets really confused and frustrated, and he throws the book on the ground. Pizarro sees this as a threat, and so they jump Anahualpa. He gives the signal, and the Spanish attack, and a big brawl breaks out. And when it is all said and done, when the dust settles, um, all of Anahualpa's men are dead, all 5,000. Anahualpa is alive, and the Spanish only suffer one injury, and that is Pizarro with a cut on his hand. Now, Anahualpa tells Pizarro, okay, look, if you let me go, I will fill this room from wall to wall, floor to ceiling with gold and silver 3 times over. Now, Pizarro sees this as a great opportunity, and so he accepts. And Anahualpa delivers. He gets all of this gold over to the Spanish. He gets all this gold over to Pizarro. Pizarro does not let Anahualpa go. Pizarro actually has Anahualpa set up to be burned alive. Now, Anahualpa is not scared to be burned. He's not scared of death. He's okay with dying. He is not okay with dying, being burned to death. And so the reason why is that in the Incan religion, if your skin is burned by fire, you cannot pass to the other side. You can't pass to the spiritual world. You're stuck. Excuse me. Your spirit is stuck. And so, Anahualpa is trying to figure out, like, how can he get out of this? A Catholic priest sees this as an opportunity. And so this Catholic priest talks to Anahualpa and tells him, look, if you convert to being a Christian, if you convert to being a Catholic, you're still going to die, like, no matter what you're dying. But Catholics do not burn other Catholics to death, so you won't die by fire. And so Anahualpa becomes a Catholic. Now, whether he really did, in his heart of hearts, that's up to you to decide. I honestly think it was just to escape the fire. And so Anahualpa becomes a Catholic. So instead of burning him alive, they put him in this chair, and they tie down his arms and his legs, and a metal band is placed around his neck. And they slowly turn this thing until he is suffocating to death. They strangle him to death. Now, as if that isn't already a horrible, awful way to die, right before he dies, if I remember correctly, the record says before he takes his last breath, a Spaniard comes up with a torch and burns his arm before he dies. And so it was literally adding insult to injury for Anahualpa to die. And so the Spanish conquered the Inca, and they established missions and colonies in South America. And we'll talk more about that later. Of the conquest of Peru was a phenomenal feat for the Spanish, because they would eventually find this mountain. This mountain was pretty much literally silver. The whole thing was almost silver, called Potosi. And we'll talk about Potosi later. But for now, that's it for Mesoamerican history. I hope that all of y'all take the time to go over your reviews. I may make a video for your review. Please don't bet on it, because it's a little difficult for me to even make this one. So I hope that y'all have a great day, and hopefully I'll be back in a lot sooner than later. Bye-bye.